to The Panel, a forum where we discuss the tough topics and serious issues. The Panel is produced by Caymanian Times newspaper and brings together leading analysts and experts taking an in-depth look at current issues facing the Cayman Islands. For the next hour, our panel will share their knowledge, foresight, insight, and experience as Cayman charts its way forward. The panel, frank, open, serious, and informed exchange of views and ideas. Now here's your host, Ralph Lewis, with Roy Bodden and Mario E. Ebanks.
Good afternoon and welcome to the panel. The ability of the Cayman Islands to survive the current pandemic and emerge successful depends heavily on the performance of government, the business community, and Cayman society. Factual and independent reporting is critical to this success. Information, education, and debate are also important factors that ensure continued growth and development of the Cayman Islands. Today, we are happy to launch our weekly live podcast with a panel of resident analysts. We also encourage feedback from the public at large as we discuss the tough topics of the day, including but not limited to COVID-19, reopening the borders, tourism, the economy, healthcare, employment, and of course, vaccinations. And it's my pleasure to invite two of my panel guests, and today we have with me Mr. Roy Bodden and Mr. Mario Ebanks. Mario Ebanks is a long-term business administrator, HR professional and consultant, accredited director, a public policy analyst, and thought leader. He's a graduate of the Cayman Islands High School, and amongst his host of certifications, he holds an MBA from the University of Tennessee, as well as a bachelor's degree in international finance and marketing with a minor in economics and public affairs from the University of Miami. He has held a number of senior posts in the Cayman Islands, in both the private and public sectors, including the financial services sector, the manager of the Chamber of Commerce, a former director of labor and pensions and human resources consulting and strategic roles. He has served on a number of statutory boards in the past and also serves as director in various non-profit and regulated entities and boards. He has resided in Coral Gables in West Bay for the past 28 years with his wife of 33 years, Lavinia Ebanks. Mr. Roy Bodden, J.A. Roy Bodden as he's known, is a former Cayman Island legislator and government minister and former president of the University College of the Cayman Islands. He's a highly respected historian and academic, and a knowledgeable and engaging public affairs commentator. And with that said, I'd like to say good afternoon once again to my dear friends here. Welcome to the panel. It's really a pleasure to have you on board with me, and we look forward to lots of things to go.
Thank you very much.
Afternoon, the pleasure is mine to be here.
Yeah. As promised, we're here to talk about tough topics and to address the issues that we know affect so many lives, including ours. And we're going to talk about two issues today, and the first one is the COVID community spread. Grand Cayman has been dealing with instances of COVID-19 community spread, which has caused quite a stir for the government and our community. This week, we learned of positive cases involving students of another primary school. The recent reports received yesterday state that there were 15 new cases, with 11 being community positive. And today, we heard about further 5 positive cases, with 3 related to schools. Before we start our discussion, we wish those affected by the virus a speedy recovery. Mr. Bodden, what are your thoughts on these latest developments?
You know, Mr. Lewis, I'm not surprised, nor do I believe that there is reason to be alarmed. If we follow the science and we abide by the protocols set out, I think that this too will pass. But I want to go further in saying that I would like our listeners and viewers to realize that we are at an inflection point now where this pandemic is concerned in our society. And we have to stop, take a breath, and decide which way we are going. Whether we are going to follow the science, encourage vaccination, and abide by the protocols that have been issued, that is, wearing of masks, hand sanitizing, keeping social distance, or whether we are going to pander to the conspiracy theorists and be led astray by those who think, well, this is the beginning of the end. They're going to be imposing all these things on us, and we're going to see people in the streets, and we're going to lose our freedoms and all that. The only thing that will cause us to lose our freedom is if we behave irresponsibly and lose control of the pandemic and its spread. So I would suggest we don't panic, even although we are hearing of community spread. We leave it to the authorities, and for us, the citizens, abide by the protocols. We know what we have to do in terms of personal hygiene, social distancing, and all that, and abide by that. And this too will pass.
Mr. Mario.
Yeah, I want to agree with what my colleague, Mr. Roy Bodden, said. And Ralph, I also want to say thank you very much for organizing this panel. I think it's very timely, very important to have high-level discussion in our community, talking about solutions, ideas. The issue about our community spread, however, I want to take it to another perspective also. But I want to say also, as Mr. Bodden said, that the vaccine, in particular the one that we have here, the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, is not an emergency approved vaccine. It is now given FDA, US FDA, full approval. So it's not an experiment, and it's been tested around the world millions of times. But one of the issues I have with all the anxiety with the reopening and some of the scare tactics, right, is what alternative do the people who are out there objecting to the vaccine and talking about keeping the economy closed, what alternative do they have? Do they have a tested, proven, safe, and better alternative? I mean, we talk about the immune system being strengthened, and that's all good. And we talk about salt water, we talk about sun, and we talk about other remedies. But are those tested and proven? So that's the first issue that I want to introduce. But I think that the excuse about vaccine, the technical issues of the vaccine, the mRNA, and people talk about the protein spike in the vaccine and those kind of things. Now, I believe that there ought to be more technical discussion out there in the community, whether it's talk shows, whether it is town hall meetings, to actually have the experts talk about these, right? Because there are some people who are confused about it. But I think that the people who are out there causing this big fuss, that this talk about the technical aspects of the vaccine and talking about freedom of choice may not necessarily be based solely on that, but that could be a scapegoat. Because I think some people are concerned that the economic growth in this country and the reopening of our economy and our borders, if we continue doing the same old, they're going to say, well, what's in it for me? Why should I worry about my health or my family health with reopening if I am not participating in the economic growth? So there's some of that going on. I sense that from people that I talk to. Because in tourism industry, and Mr. Bodden, who is a past legislator and past Minister for Labour, past UCCI president, will probably agree with me that most Caymanians are not really engaged or invested in the tourism industry, as they're seeing, a lot of them are seeing the negative impacts, the crowds, the traffic, the social decay, the environmental stress, but they cannot see how they are personally benefiting. So I think, and this is a topic perhaps we can discuss in the future, Mr. Ralph, the employment issue, but the tourism industry, the hospitality industry, in my view, has failed in trying to get the public to buy in to the benefits of tourism. And while you can see it, some people, it takes it to show how it impacts them. So if you can't get a job and you go to a restaurant and you see no Caymanians, and if you go to a hotel and you see the doormen from Ukraine or from Bulgaria, and a Caymanian can't get that job, people start wondering, what is in it for me? So I think we got to get to that point too, to make sure that people are not opposing the reopening of our borders and our economy to fight another battle. And that other battle could be, look, we can't continue with this. Now, I have always believed, and during the last election campaign, I said that COVID-19 gives us a good opportunity to press the reset button, to reset and say, look, how can we build back better, to use Joe Biden's theme? How can we build back better? We have an opportunity, and we talked about this before the break, before we started. We have an opportunity to actually do things better, do things different. This is a good opportunity, but are we doing it? I don't think so. I think that there's a lot of lip service about training Caymanians and getting Caymanians interested and getting people educated about the tourism industry and careers, but not enough is being done by government or by the private sector. So the reopening and the spread, is something that obviously we knew it was coming. But the good thing is that we are probably 72% vaccinated. So we have a defense. This is a war. This is World War III. And if we sit back and think we're going to wait for utopia, for this thing to go away, it's going to be here for a long time. The government just released the Management and Control COVID-19 Regulation 2021. I thought it was a good set of regulations. My only question with the regulations that are just put out last week for the control and management of the virus and the pandemic is, who's the project manager for this exercise? Who's in charge? Who is the authority? I get the impression that there's nobody in charge. It's all over the place.
And we'll get back to that in a minute.
Yes.
But
okay.
There's so many things we can talk about, and we may have to have another follow-up sessions. And I think next week's podcast is going to focus on employment.
Yes.
So we'll talk about the hospitality industry.
Okay.
But let me take you back to where we started. The community spread. And the reason for this was because I felt that everyone is panicking right now. And in the press briefing I attended, I asked the Premier, what happened if we have another community spread next week? What will the response be? He said that we've learned from the first time, so we should be good. So now that we have seen more community spreads in the community, of course, which includes kids, and the government said that it was prepared and it had things in place to go through these phases. What I'd like to hear from you, gentlemen, is how do you rate the government's performance in handling these phases, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3? We're now in pause at phase 3, and so we want to know if we should open our borders very soon, or maybe hold on till the end of the year. But with the community spread now amongst us, how should we move forward, and how should the government move forward, and how have they done so far in dealing with this outbreak of community spread?
Well, let me say that I give the government credit for their attempts to deal with it. And one of the things that I said of the previous political directorate, I gave them a strong score on how they handled the pandemic. This current political directorate are advised by the same people who advised the former political directorate, their predecessors. And I think this political directorate are doing well, notwithstanding the fact that they're under a lot of pressure because we're coming up to the time which would be the traditional opening of the tourist season. But I believe, to their credit, that they are hastening slowly, because we have to ensure that we have an understanding of this community spread that we are experiencing now, it seems to me, among the school children. And by the way, that is something that I anticipated once the children had gone back to school after the summer break. So it's not something that we cannot deal with, or that we're not equipped to deal with. And my colleague on the show, Mario, has made mention of the fact that we have about 71 or 72% vaccination rate. So that should land us in a good stead. What needs to happen now is that the society, the NGOs, the public at large, need to find a way to lockstep with the government so that this is a collective effort and not seen as a government mandate, subjecting the government to criticism by those people who will stand under the human rights rubric and say the government are imposing things on them. So what we need is a broad front. Citizens, private sector, and government moving forward to come up with a common strategy.
Yes.
Mario made a good point. From the government, we want to know who is the point man, who is the leader, who is the Fauci or all these people from the CDC and that the Americans have that are leading, that are strategizing, that are coming to the nation with the science and explaining it so that the lay people can understand and empathize and be motivated to perform and not left to the whims and fancies of detractors.
Yes, yeah.
And just before Mr. Marriott
Yes.
jumps in, you're calling for someone like a Dr. Fauci. If I remember clearly, Dr. Lee was that gentleman when we locked down last year, and he was here recently. Now we understand that he's retiring and he's moving back in January, but there has been no indication of someone who's going to take his place. So maybe you're speaking about the gentleman or the individual who's going to replace Dr. Lee, and maybe that's who we should be looking for, asking for. Right.
That's what I'm saying is as Mr. Roy mentioned, who is in charge? What is the structure of this organization? When we had this break recently at the Georgetown Primary School, we were headlong talking about the 14th of October opening. Yes. We were headlong providing all kind of incentives for the vaccine, getting the place vaccinated, and then this happened, and then everybody ran for cover. Ran to the foxholes. The foxholes were not even ready. They had to dig them back out to get back in there. So we need to understand who is in charge, what's the structure. Do they have a project team? Do they have a project manager? Do they have methodologies so that if something happens, they activate this plan. If this happens, they activate that plan. This is a war. You cannot fight a war by panicking. And I think that the government also was, as I agree with you, we're hasting slowly. But I think that we can't panic if we're on the offense with the vaccine, right? If we're on the offense and we have a defensive mechanism, something happens, we got to be able to live with it. And so whether it's Dr. Lee or whoever it is that we call upon, we need to know who's in charge. Now we don't need to have everybody involved because you get nothing done, but you got to have a structure, including, as you say, the community, all the stakeholders and the industry. But like I said, messaging and communication is very important. Now, what happened, and I agree with the tourism industry, what happened in this case, by pausing, all of the airfare reservations are cancelled, all the bookings are cancelled, and a lot of things are happening which is bad for the economy. But at that time, I guess the government didn't know how bad this thing was, and without taking a little longer to assess it, they put the brakes on. And at that moment that happened, the cancellations started. And so the traditional Christmas season for tourism now is pretty much dead. We've got to make sure we can sustain ourselves locally, but from overseas it's going to be difficult indeed. And so we have to sympathize with people for that, but at the same time we have to make sure that our citizens are safe. And we have to ensure that people are vaccinated because the vaccine is important. That's the only weapon that we have that can work. And is tested and is working, and basically it wouldn't necessarily prevent you from getting it, but if you get it, you're not going to be as sick. I got one of my best friends from West Bay told me this week he has family, Caymanian family living in Brownsville, Texas. Everybody in the household, in the family, except his cousin of 41 years old, took the vaccine. His cousin is dead. He didn't take it. But all the other members of the family were exposed, and they had little symptoms, but they were okay. But he didn't take it. He didn't want to take it, Texan, and they did. So it works. But people want utopia. They want to have something perfect. And they have these, as Brother Roy mentioned, this conspiracy theories. And I think we got to work as a country, work together. This is a war. As I said, when I was manager of Chamber of Commerce in the 80s, late 80s, we had a program that we launched with the tourism industry, the government, Minister of Tourism at the time, Mr. Roy Bodden, and others called Tourism is Everybody's Business. You remember that too, Mr.
Yes.
Roy?
Yeah.
And we got everybody together and we talked about what is it important about the industry to us. We need the same thing with this COVID thing. Pull people together and lead by being united, not panicking, being courageous.
And our next topic is actually reopening, but before we go to the break, just to wrap up on the first topic about the community spread. Do you think we should have paused? And do you have an idea of when we should be opening?
If I think we should have paused,
Yes.
I don't think that there was anything wrong with the pause. What I think is weak is our leadership strategy. I think what we need and what we are looking for, and I hope it's not too late, is for someone now to come forward from the government, a scientist, perhaps a medical doctor, to someone to say, here is where I think we should go based upon the science, and this is my team. For example, why isn't there not an assistant to Dr. John Lee, so that if he is missing, we could have someone filling in? I mean, we don't have the kind of sophisticated system they have in the United States with the Centers of Disease Control, the National Institute of Health, and all these kind of parallel organizations. But we could have had an organization where Dr. Lee has a lieutenant, so that if he's not there, his lieutenant stands in. Because what you don't want to lose at this point is the confidence of the populace.
Right.
You don't want to let the populace believe that you're just floundering and you're putting out fires. So when you appear on the national scene or hold a press conference, is because you're trying to avert a panic situation. You want to leave them with the impression that you are in firm control, that you know where you're going, and that there is a plan B, and that there is a lieutenant. So that's what I'm looking for. And to me, that's the disappointment now. So we should have had the pause, but we should have had someone to explain it's a pause. And after the pause, here is the direction in which we are going, and we expect to go there come January. Or we don't have a timetable, we don't have a plan. So we paused, and what? Is it a forever pause?
Yeah. Good.
Well, we do hope that in the next couple of days, about the next press briefing, I understand, it will be next week, that we should hear something about what is going to happen after the pause. And for those listeners or viewers, we believe that having open discussion about these things, we're not here to criticize anyone, but to share our views, and from that, maybe who is affects or the government would probably get some thoughts about it and be able to provide some answers and put things in place that can provide a solution for this pandemic that we find ourselves in. We'll take a short break and be back with you in a few minutes. back to the panel. Our regular Thursday edition, this is our first one. We're just starting off today with our guest today, and we hope to be here for a long time to come. It's going to be a regular Thursday afternoon podcast between 3 and 4, where we are discussing the tough issues. Next issue that we're going to continue to talk about is the reopening. And whilst our neighbors are opening their borders, we have chosen to pause the phase reopening until a later date, which is yet to be announced. Gentlemen, are we prepared to open? It's one thing to have a date to reopen, but are we prepared once we say we're going to open, that we can open? And what has been put in place to ensure that we are ready to move forward? Mr. Roy.
Well, one of the things that disappoints me is that the industry, namely the hospitality industry, did not take the opportunity while we were still on pause to reset. I had full well expected to have heard of some kind of retraining, retooling of persons in the hospitality industry, particularly young people, some kind of campaign to get these people ready for when we were reopened so that we could have people ready professionally to serve. I'm disappointed that the Tourism Association and the hotels and the restaurants didn't take that opportunity. And so there is a sense in which I say that while there's a cry for us now to reopen, whom are we going to reopen with? Are we going to be relying on imported people? The same old excuse. We're going to say, well, we got to bring in people from X jurisdiction, Y jurisdiction, and keep them until we train Caymanians. Why did we not have some kind of program to say, okay, now that we've trained this number of Caymanians, we see that we are still deficient in numbers, which we agree we are going to have to import for our opening. But no, where is the science? Where is the science behind the management, the human capital management?
Yeah, I want to agree with that, with what Mr. Bodden said. There's no strategy, there's no plan. From last year when we had the lockdown, there's two things in this. You have the lockdown strategy and the reopening strategy. We had a pretty good lockdown strategy, but the reopening strategy is weak. And this government that came in inherited not much of a plan, because the previous government didn't have much of a plan. And so we're now paying the price for that. It's a good thing that we had this little scare a few weeks ago with the outbreak community spread, because had we gone our merry way on 14th of October and liberalized the opening and had something then, it would have been total chaos. So this was almost like a dry run. So in a way, it gave us a chance to say, well, wait a minute, we've been complacent, we've been flat-footed for the last year. Let's get our act together here, right? But I want to read something that the president of the acting CEO and Director General of the Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association said on World Tourism Day, which was 27th of September. And the theme was Tourism for Inclusive Growth. It says, our sector, which attracts, this is Caribbean now, which attracts precious foreign exchange revenues, has suffered grievously as a result, and economies and people of the region have been enormously impacted. The tourism is the major breadwinner for the Caribbean, and whatever affects tourism affects the region as a whole. And so she's calling people to participate actively in the continued drive to return our sector back to its diverse, dynamic pre-COVID state and jump-starting a recovery by including people. So to Mr. Bodden's point, we have to get people trained and ready and included. And so I think that we are in a good position. We're probably the best position in many countries in the world because of the vaccine program, providing that they don't kill that. And I think we're in a good position, but we have to get a plan. We've got to know who's in charge. We've got to inspire and engage the private sector, delegate to them and hold them responsible. And everybody has to be on the front lines of this war, not in the background, throwing shots at, taking shots at those in the front. It has to be a collective, inclusive kind of approach. So that's the paper that was, the government put something out called RB5, which is the road back to 500,000 arrival strategic plan. They did that last year to talk about getting us back to the numbers. Now, of course, that's a good plan, but how are you going to get there? And is it sustainable? As I said, we have to press the restart button and get back to some of the basics. We're not doing that, so we're going to end up doing Paul Keene's Douglas thing. We're on a precipice. We're going to make one bold step forward if we're not careful.
Yes, so true, so true. We live in a bubble, but we also are part of a global village. And what happens, to our neighbors will eventually affect us. And we have to understand that what is happening around the world with the cases increases definitely will impact what happens once we open the borders. So some may argue that it's a blessing in disguise with the pause. But at some point we have to move forward. And my personal view is that it's like going to the beach and you go in the water and it's cold. You pull back, but you don't run away from the beach and go home. You put your toe in, then you take a step, and as the water gradually goes up to your knee, you're able to go in further. But yes, it's uncomfortable, but you don't run back home and say, I'm not going to the beach today. So what I'm saying is that we have to take these steps gradually as we move forward into the opening. I understand the concerns regarding the economy and the employment for the tourism workers, and that's another story for another discussion another time. But because we will never get the volumes of tourists coming to our shores that will provide work for everyone. And I believe that they should have been retooled to do other jobs or encouraged to be retooled with other jobs. And we should have created other industries in the Cayman Islands. So my question is to you, Mario, I'll start with you, Mario, this time. Yeah. Do you think that those same stipend receivers has the ability or should have been given the opportunity to do other roles in the community or get trained up so they could do other things besides try and get a job in the tourism market?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, some of them have actually moved on to do other things. Some of them have re-engineered their businesses to do other services to be able to survive, and because they can't really survive on the stipend alone. But I mean, I think a lot of these people, they know tourism. They're people kind of persons, and we have to get more Caymanians on the front lines of our tourism industry. This is probably one of the few countries you go to that everywhere you turn, there's non-Caymanians in the tourism industry, there's hotels, restaurants, bars, or whatever. So those people who were getting a stipend should have been encouraged to retool, to train, to do something, some kind of courses to be able to better themselves, whether it's tourism industry or elsewhere. But like I said, remember though, a lot of businesses were downturned as well last year into this year, so there really wasn't a whole lot of options for them either, but the training could have been done and a partnership between the government and the private sector to retool them.
Mr. Roy?
I agree with those observations, but additionally, I have said that the hospitality industry offers an incredible opportunity for young Caymanians to take advantage of what I call corollary markets to tourism. Why, for example, are we not encouraging micro-industries with spin-offs that the tourist industry can tap into? Cottage industries. Why are we not training up artisans? Why are we not encouraging people in home cottage industries, making things like preservatives, jams, jellies, crafts? For example, the crafts market now is fallen into abeyance because we have never had a plan. And when we have plans, we put one person in charge and it has to be their way or anyway. The greatest example of what I'm dealing with, and I keep going back to this, is what Mohammed Yunus did with the Grameen Bank in Bangladesh. He set up these micro industries, mainly among the women, and anybody who knows Islamic society knows that the women are marginalized. Mohammed Yunus set up this bank. He funded these women to do things like cottage industries, and today the Grameen Bank is the model of the world. It's the only bank with a 98% repayment rate. These people They have cottage industries. They have sewing machines. They make uniforms for the uniform services, and they have their support groups, much like how Alcoholics Anonymous meet, and they support one another, and they talk about common problems and how to navigate them. I'm disappointed that the government has the ideal mechanism already now in the development bank. We just have to have a change of attitude, and we can spin that off so that we can take some people directly from the tourism industry and put them in these things that can support cottage industries and that will enhance our tourism product. So we need to begin now thinking outside the box. There is time now for a paradigm shift, because we clearly, we're not doing well in direct employment because they bring in cheap labor from other third world countries. I call them disposable people that work for less than Caymanians will work. So the only way Caymanians are going to make it now is if we give them another shot in the arm, so that they have some other things that they can fall upon if they so wish. So that there'll be two planks. They can be directly in the hospitality industry, or they can be on the periphery catering to things that, and people will buy these things. People will buy them. They will buy jams and jellies, locally made. They will buy local crafts. In other jurisdictions, that's a big spin-off of the tourism. I've seen it happen in Barbados. I've seen it happen in Jamaica. I've seen it happen in other places. So it's time now for us to begin to think outside the box and enhance the opportunities for our people so that they can have fuller benefits from the hospitality industry. But we can't leave that to the hoteliers, because all they're looking for is labor to fill their halls and their kitchens and their rooms. So it has to come from some other aspect, some other arm.
Agreed. I want to remember a good friend of ours, Mr. Bo Miller, Darrington Miller. He died 4 years ago. And he talked about product came on, the tourism product. And one of the things that I am amazed at and looking in the last year, our Department of Tourism that we have, it's a good department, good people in it, but they haven't released anybody, they haven't downsized, doing all this time. What are they doing about developing our products? Some of the same thing you're talking about, the cottage industries and getting more people involved. I mean, they haven't been marketing because it's global shutdown, right?
Yes.
So they should have been focused on the internal building
Exactly.
of our industry.
Exactly.
And so that's why I say that we should have, and as Roy mentioned about the development bank, Caymanian Development Bank, and that they have a big role to play as well. I think this government is talking about giving them a bigger role to play. But this is the kind of stuff we need. We need to look at where we want to be in the year 2050. You know,
That's correct.
You know, make a
That's
plan.
correct.
Press that restart button. Let's get on with it, and just don't say let's open and just go back to the same old thing again. I think that's going to be a bit.
See, I want to say this too, Mr. Lewis. I'm concerned about the stipend, because the basic principle, and I learned this from the Colonels when I worked in one of their merchant houses, you can't continue to give out what you're not taking in.
Yeah.
One of these days the pot is going to dry up. So the stipend is good, but the same people who are getting the stipend, we should be preparing them for something else, so that they can help themselves, and we gradually withdraw or reduce the stipend. That is what we need to begin doing. That's what we need to begin looking at.
There are so much, things that we can discuss and recommendations that we could give, but it's clear that there's a challenge ahead of us. And we call it the perfect storm in a publication we did some time ago. It's just so many things happen at the same time. And of course, we have a new government. We have this is hurricane season. We have one of the biggest pandemics that have affected our living years, for mine at least. And plus, we've lost a major source of revenue that the country needs and depends on, because as we depend on so much we export from outside, and we heavily depend upon banking and tourism. What I would like to emphasize is that this solution and this podcast is not about talking about what people should do, but to offer solutions as well.
Yeah.
I believe that we have a responsibility here as intellectuals to offer some solution, ideas, and we don't expect the government to be able to fix the problem. And so we're here to offer, and also we need to work together. So when I see things happening that's dividing the community, what happens is that it takes away from the efforts to unite us. And success comes from unity. And if we don't do something about that, it can destroy us. We're hearing that there are protests being planned for, on Saturday and on Monday regarding the mandating of vaccines, for example, work withholders and work and residency applicants. And so, of course, there are many people who are concerned, but is there some way we can find a way of coming to some agreement rather than fighting and separating ourselves into the unvaccinated and the vaccinated, as we call it? I know, Mario, you had some thoughts on that. Can you?
I do. Every country has a right to have what you call gatekeeper legislation. Every country has a right to control who can get into the country, and Cayman Islands is no different. So we have our immigration law, we have the Immigration Transition Law 2018, and there's other reform being done. And we also have our Constitution. The Constitution speaks to the Bill of Rights, and it speaks to issues like communicable diseases. But one of the things that I want to raise in the immigration law is that in section 56 and 58, it talks about the things that a board should consider when they are processing an application for a work permit. And it says, in relation to the worker, and this is section 58, subsection 3A, it says, one of the things the board has to look at is the worker's health. The second thing it looks at, well, second amongst many other things, this is 3C, it says, the economic and social benefits which the worker may bring to the islands. And goes to subsection 4 and says, 4A says, protection of local interests, and in particular of Caymanians. And subsection 4C says, requirements of the community as a whole. Now, this law, the Immigration Transition Law 2018, gives us the ability to look at who comes in here and the terms and conditions that have to be satisfied. So if we want to protect our country from people potentially bringing a communicable disease in the island, make sure they're vaccinated, then our Constitution allows it. There's no human rights conflict there. Our immigration law allows it, and the Labour Act 2021 revision in section 58 says, every employer shall ensure, so far as is reasonably practicable, the health, safety and welfare at work of that person's employee. So that means that an employer can look at an employment relationship and put in place a contract to say, you have to be healthy, and if we want you to be vaccinated, you have to do that. Now, some of this under section 6 of the law, there has to be an agreement between the two parties, but an employer can stipulate those based on the strength of section 58. And the lawyers who have commented on this, the Department of Labour and Pensions have put out a paper of guidance on that. And so there's certainly cause for us doing what the government is proposing to do. But I think that the group of people who are talking about discrimination and freedom of choice and having demonstrations and having marches or whatever they're going to do on Saturday and Monday, are they saying that we shouldn't discriminate against people coming in by saying that they should be vaccinated, but we should open it up and say, you can come in, you can compete with Caymanians, we're not worried about whether there's the issue of qualifications or experience, we're going to open the floodgates. So if you say you can't discriminate by requiring them to satisfy that they are protecting us from a communicable disease, then you can't say on the other hand, yeah, but we want to protect Caymanians from them taking their jobs. So be careful with that too. I tell those people who are proposing this demonstration and riots or whatever, I mean not riots, march or whatever they're doing, to understand that discrimination and human rights will go both ways, because you can't say on one hand you can't tell them that they have to be vaccinated, but you can also say that they can't compete or take Caymanian jobs. So the rights of a small minority of people cannot overcome the rights of the majority in the case of this. This is a global pandemic. It's a very dangerous communicable disease. We have to have the right to do the correct thing for our country, for the elderly and for the children and for everybody, and of course for our economy. So I think that these people are really, they're misinformed. Maybe they're angry about other things and they're using the vaccine as that outlet, but I think that they're not. They got to look at the labor law, the constitution, and the immigration law, and look at the overall scheme of things to get their position synchronized.
Thank you, Mario. So, Roy?
Well, you know, every country has the right to set the parameters for the persons who are not citizens of that country to come in, either as a visitor or as a work permit holder, whatever category. I mean, we don't want a clearer example than the great United States. Sometimes they go from the sublime to the ridiculous, but it is clear. Certain stipulations are there. You have to be vaccinated. Now, I don't see why we should think that we are imposing on somebody's human rights if we in the Cayman Islands say, we recognize we have a problem. If you are not a Caymanian and you are coming here, these are the requirements we would wish for you to meet in this time of pandemic. If you're coming seeking employment, you have to be vaccinated and show us incontrovertible proof of your vaccination. And even so, we may require you to take a PCR test or a blood test or our own personal verification. That's not an imposition on anybody's human rights. That is commonsensical because we have to protect our own citizens. I have said, though, that some pressure could be eased off the government if the industries and organizations bringing these people could make that a stipulation of their employment, much like United Airlines are doing in the United States now, saying, if you want to work for United Airlines, you have to get the vaccination. There are about 600 people that they put on notice, get the vaccination or go home.
Yeah.
So I don't want it to make it seem like the government is a bad guy. I think that they could get a lot of help from private sector companies and other organizations who are bringing these people to say, look, if you're coming to work for us, it's a requirement that you get this vaccination so that all of the owners can be taken. Because we beat up on the government too often and sometimes unnecessarily so. And in this, I go back to what I said at the beginning. This is a war. I think that was Mario's description of it. This is a war. And in order to win this war, we need the cooperation of all elements. Yes. It can't just be the government. It's got to be the government. It has to be the private sector. It has to be the citizens. We have to be singing, as we in the church say, from the same sankey. Because otherwise, if anyone is off key or singing from someone else, it's not going to work. And the quicker we get, people have a right to demonstrate. It's a democracy. They can demonstrate. In some places, they demonstrate every day. I understand in London, they have a place called Hyde Park. You go there, you demonstrate every day. Go there and demonstrate. So people have a right to demonstrate, but demonstrate responsibly. And that's the difference.
It's similar to freedom of speech. Everyone should be allowed to give their views, make their voice heard, but of course you have to be responsible with your utterances. We're coming close to when we have to say goodbye for the first section. I've really enjoyed the banter, the conversation today. We touched on a number of tough topics, and that's what it's all about. There are a number of issues that I have shied away from in the past, but the time has come when Caymanian Times has really stepped into its own and show everybody that we're a serious newspaper, and there's serious topics that we need to talk about and have this discussion. And sometimes the environment is not conducive for that type of conversation. And it's sometimes not what you say, but how you say it and where you say it. I think as we go forward and we try to deal with this reopening of the borders, because that's where everyone agrees that our future economy depends on the opening up of the borders. We provide services. We're an industry that provides services. So we need to have access to our customers. And like I said, the tourism sector, they they provide work for our residents, and also the business sector and investors. They need to come to our country. So we heavily dependent on reopening the borders. For some of our own people who have left the shores, and Caymanians love to travel, we are limited on where we can go. And we need this kind of interaction. Our future life depends on reopening the borders. And so I think that having a conversation from time to time on this topic and the many facets of it, the many angles that can take us, will help us understand and help us move forward. And one final question regarding vaccines. We are almost up to 80%. By probably next week, we are at 80%. Should the government still push forward with the mandating and those efforts that they're doing now to get as much people as we can vaccinated, or should they not sort of back off at this point?
I think they should try to go to 90% if they can. You know, Israel had a situation where they had the COVID squashed, right? Mm-hmm. They had a couple of travelers came in, and this thing spread. Yes. Syria spread, right? Now, if we reopen our borders, we're going to need to bring workers from overseas, mm-hmm. and places like the Ritz and Kimpton are going to bring 500 to 1,000 people at least. Now, all you need a couple of them to come in, and they're not vaccinated, and they're not, the protocols are not there, and you have a spread, and you have a major problem. So I think that we need to keep pushing on the vaccine, and we need to set a date for the opening of the borders, whether it's 1st of December, 1st of November, whatever the case is, and work towards that. But as I said at the beginning, we got to have a plan, a strategy, a structure, and we got to stick to it and get people engaged, committed, and held accountable. I also want to say, if I could, that under the Constitution, Section 19.1, and I hear what Mr. Roy Bodden is saying about, sort of somewhat delegating some of this to the private sector. I don't think he's mean that you want to pass the buck or anything, but I think I want to give the government credit for being bold and courageous to bring this legislation, bring this bill to the forefront. That's what government's supposed to do, lead by example. And I think that the government is actually doing it, and it complies, in my view, with Section 19.1 of the Bill of Rights, which says all decisions and acts of public officials must be lawful, rational, proportionate, and procedural fair. Once you satisfy that litmus test, then let's get it done. Let's get it done.
Mr. Roy, any final words as we head towards wrapping up?
I was, as we were discussing, I was thinking of a famous quote by none other than Napoleon. For some reason, that Napoleon, the great French general and strategist, crossed my mind. Napoleon was reputed to have said, "Fortune is like a woman. If you miss her today, think not of finding her tomorrow." So that's the situation we're in now with this predicament. Fortune is like a woman. So if we miss out on this opportunity, we will never catch up. But what we have to do in order to ensure that we don't miss out, we have to be as prepared as we can be. We have to be as disciplined as we can be. And I want to come back to your question of, should we relax at 80%? No. We should push on. We should go to 90. And when we reach 90, we should go beyond. Because this is not a battle, it's a war. Mm-hmm. And we have mutations. And that's the problem now. The Delta variant, we have all these variants. So the more people we can have vaccinated, I think the better position we will be in, and the better we will be poised to take advantage of fortune and to ensure that we are on the right track. We can't relax. And like Mario, I give the government credit, but I also believe sometimes we're so quick to whip the government. that the government should not be expected to bear all of the responsibility.
Right.
The brunt, yes, but not all.
Yes, right.
The private sector has its part to play. The Hotel and Tourism Association, or the Tourism Association, as they call themselves, and all these other organizations have equal parts to play to shore up the government, because this is not an exercise for one entity. This is an exercise for all, including us, the citizens.
Okay, thank you. And before we go to Mario for some final words, I remember a release came out recently where the Chamber of Commerce did say that they are cooperating with the government and they're working on them and they're communicating better with them, and they'll have a plan of action that they're going to recommend very soon. They've asked its members to take a survey and that, to get some feedback, and we expect to see some communication soon on their recommendations to the government as to how we should step forward. I think that's one of the entities that you're referring to, not only the Chamber of Commerce,
Yes.
but the Tourism Association and so on. Mario.
I'm not good as Mr. Bodden with quotations and history and literary arts, but I just want to end with a quote as well. But this is, as you say, this is a war, and COVID-19 is our common enemy. And so by our action, by the action that we take, we determine whether this is the beginning of the end or the end of the beginning. And I want to end by a quote by President John F. Kennedy, who said, and I want to encourage all the public with this, he said, ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. Let's get out there and do a little bit to win this war. Thank you very much, Ralph. It's been a good discussion, and thanks again for doing
Thank
this.
you.
And thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. And for the public and those who took time now to join us for our first episode, thank you very much. And we will be here next week at 3 p.m. on Thursday afternoon, God willing. I want to wish everyone a happy weekend and stay safe, Cayman. We love you and God bless.
This has been The Panel, a forum where we discuss the tough topics and serious issues facing the Cayman Islands. Join us next Thursday at 3 p.m. for another edition. If you missed today's podcast, you can watch the entire program on our Facebook page and our YouTube channel. Share the link and like the page. The Panel is a Caymanian Times production.